the sea had closed, and with it, the past. No chains, no Pharaoh, no returning. They were free, truly free. But freedom was not the end of the journey. It was the beginning. At first, there was relief, joy, celebration, songs of victory. But slowly, reality set in. The desert was unforgiving. The sun burned without mercy. The land offered nothing. No water, no food, only emptiness. And the people began to ask, was this freedom? Hunger grew, thirst followed, and with it, complaints. We had food in Egypt. We had water. Why did you bring us here? To die? The same voices that celebrated now questioned. The same people who were freed now longed for slavery. Because the past, even when painful, can feel safer than the unknown. But they were not abandoned. When hunger came, provision followed. Bread from heaven, manna, appearing with the morning dew. Enough for each day. No more, no less. A lesson in trust. And when thirst became unbearable, water came from a rock. In the middle of the desert, life flowed. Miracles did not remove the wilderness, but they made survival possible. This was no longer just a group of people. They were becoming a nation, learning to live, learning to trust. And at the center of it all was Moses, not just a leader, but a guide, a mediator, carrying the weight of thousands. Every complaint, every fear, every failure, he carried it before God. Then they came to a mountain, not ordinary, not silent, alive, with fire. Clouds covered its peak. Thunder shook the ground. Lightning split the sky. This was Mount Sinai. And here, everything would change. Moses climbed, alone, into the fire, into the cloud, into the presence of God. On that mountain, he received something greater than miracles. The law, instructions, boundaries, a covenant, not just freedom, but purpose, a way to live, a way to become different, set apart, chosen. This was the moment a people became a nation. But while Moses was on the mountain, the people waited, and waiting became doubt, doubt became fear, and fear led to failure. They built an idol, a golden calf, something they could see, something they could control. And in that moment, they forgot everything. Moses returned, and what he saw broke him. Anger, grief, disappointment. But the story did not end there, because where there was failure, there was also mercy. The journey continued, not because the people were perfect, but because God was faithful. Years passed. The desert shaped them, changed them, prepared them, and at last, they stood near the promised land, the destination, so close, so real, so near. But for Moses, the journey would end differently. He had faced kings, walked through fire, parted seas. He had carried a nation through its weakest moments, but he would not enter the land. He would only see it from a distance, not because his story failed, but because his purpose was complete. Moses was never meant to arrive. He was meant to lead, and because of that, his name would not be remembered as a ruler, but as something greater, a servant, a guide, a man chosen by God. And long after the desert fell silent, his story would still be told. For centuries, the descendants of Israel labored under the scorching sun of Egypt, their cries rising to the heavens for a savior. The plagues had passed, leaving the empire in mourning. Now, the moment of deliverance had finally arrived. In the cover of darkness, families gathered their few belongings, moving with a mixture of urgency and trembling hope. Moses, the man of faith, emerged at their head. With his wooden staff in hand, he prepared to lead a nation into the unknown. They were not alone. By day, a massive pillar of cloud guided their steps across the desert sands. And by night, a towering pillar of fire provided light and warmth, a divine beacon in the cold wilderness. But the journey took an unexpected turn. The path led them directly to the edge of the vast, unforgiving Red Sea. A heavy silence fell over the multitude. Ahead lay the deep water. Behind them, the ghosts of their past. Back in the heart of Egypt, Pharaoh's heart hardened. Regret turned into a vengeful fury. The order was given. A massive army of chariots and soldiers mobilized, a storm of iron and bronze ready to strike. Panic erupted as the Israelites saw the dust clouds rising on the horizon. The Egyptian army was closing in. Trapped between the merciless sea and a relentless army, the people cried out in fear. Chaos threatened to consume them. Amidst the screaming and the wind, Moses stood calm. His eyes were not on the enemy, but on the Almighty. Stepping toward the water's edge, he lifted his staff. It was a gesture of absolute, unyielding faith. Suddenly, a powerful wind began to blow, tearing across the surface of the sea with supernatural force. The impossible happened. The waters divided, rising like massive walls on the left and the right. Step by step, the nation moved forward, walking through the very heart of the sea on dry ground. Fear turned to awe. They looked up at the translucent walls, seeing the wonders of the deep frozen in place by divine command. The Egyptian army did not hesitate. They charged into the gap, their chariots thundering onto the sea floor in pursuit. But the ground began to shift. Chariot wheels bogged down in the mud, and confusion gripped the ranks of the Pharaoh. As the last of the Israelites reached the far shore, Moses turned and stretched his hand back over the sea. The walls of water collapsed with a thunderous roar, sweeping away the chariots, the horsemen, and the power of Egypt. Silence returned to the Red Sea. On the other side, a free people stood, their chains broken forever. They looked toward the horizon, at the vast wilderness that lay ahead. The journey was far from over, but they were finally free. The wilderness was behind him. The voice in the fire still echoed within him. And ahead lay Egypt, the empire he once called home. The throne he once walked beside, the king he once obeyed. But this time he would not return as a prince. He would return with a message. After 40 years, Moses stepped back into Egypt. Nothing had changed. The same chains, the same cries, the same suffering. Time had passed, but oppression remained. And somewhere within the palace walls sat the man responsible, Pharaoh, a king who believed he answered to no one. Moses entered the palace, not with armies, not with weapons, but with words. He stood before Pharaoh and spoke, "This is what the Lord says, let my people go." Silence filled the throne room. Then laughter. "Who is this Lord that I should obey him?" Pharaoh did not see a threat. He saw a man, and men could be ignored. Pharaoh's answer was not freedom. It was punishment. If they have time to ask for freedom, they have time to work harder. The order was given. No more straw for bricks, but the same quota. Impossible demands. Unbearable pressure. The people suffered even more, and Moses became the one they blamed. Hope turned into frustration. Faith began to shake. But this was not just a battle of words. It was a battle of power. Moses cast his staff to the ground, and it became a serpent, a sign, a warning. But Pharaoh called his magicians, and they did the same. Illusion met with truth, power challenged by imitation. But then, something unexpected. Moses' serpent consumed the others. A quiet victory, a clear message, but Pharaoh still refused. Then the signs became judgment. The Nile turned to blood. The source of life became death. Fish died. Water rotted. The land cried out. But Pharaoh's heart did not move. Then came the chaos. Frogs everywhere, in homes, in beds, in food. Gnats filled the air. Fellies covered the land. Livestock died. Boils covered skin. Pain spread across Egypt. Still Pharaoh refused. Then the sky turned violent. Thunder, hail, fire from heaven. Crops destroyed. Fields shattered. Egypt was breaking. But the king would not bend. Then came darkness. Not night. Darkness that could be felt. Thick, heavy, unmoving. For days Egypt stood still. No light, no movement, no escape. But in the homes of the Hebrews there was light, a divide, clear, undeniable. And still Pharaoh said no. Moses returned one final time. No signs, no displays, just a warning. This is what will happen. The firstborn will die. From the palace to the lowest home, no one would be spared. Silence followed, heavy, unavoidable, final. Pharaoh refused again, and then night fell, a silence deeper than before, and across Egypt a cry rose, not from one home, but from all. Grief, loss, judgment. The empire had been struck, and this time Pharaoh broke. In the darkest night, the order finally came. Go, leave, take your people and go. After generations of slavery, freedom had arrived. But freedom was only the beginning, because ahead was a sea, and behind them an army. The child who survived the river did not grow up among slaves. He grew up In a palace, surrounded by gold, by power, by privilege, Moses lived as royalty. But deep within him, something never settled, because no matter how rich his surroundings were, he could not silence the truth in his heart. He was not Egyptian. Two identities lived within him, one shaped by the palace, the other written in his blood. He saw the suffering, he heard the cries. Day after day, his people were beaten, broken, humiliated, and something inside him began to burn, not slowly, but intensely, a fire of anger, a fire of justice. Then, one day, the moment came. An Egyptian taskmaster was beating a Hebrew slave. Not discipline, not control, cruelty. Moses looked around. No one, no witnesses, no stopping. And in that moment, something snapped. He stepped forward and struck the Egyptian down. Silence. The air stood still. What had been done could not be undone. He buried the body in the sand, but he could not bury the truth. By the next day, it was known, and suddenly, the prince became a target. Pharaoh heard, and his response was immediate: death. And so, he ran, from power to exile, from everything he had ever known, into the wilderness. The desert did not welcome him. It tested him, stripped him of comfort, of status, until all that remained was the man himself. Time passed, not days, not months, years, decades, 40 years of silence. Moses became a shepherd, leading sheep across dry land, under endless skies. He married, he built a quiet life, far removed from Egypt, far removed from destiny, or so it seemed, because sometimes God does not call immediately. Sometimes he prepares. The palace had given Moses knowledge, but the desert was shaping his soul, teaching patience, teaching humility, teaching surrender. Then came a day, like any other. No sign, no warning, just a shepherd guiding his flock near the mountain of Horeb. A bush burst into flame. Fire rose, bright, alive, intense, but something was wrong. The leaves did not burn. The fire consumed nothing. It simply existed, defying nature. Moses stopped, stared, and then he moved closer. And then a voice: Moses, Moses, do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. The voice spoke again. I have seen the suffering. I have heard their cries. I know their pain. I am sending you. You will go to Pharaoh and bring my people out of Egypt. Silence, heavy, unavoidable. Moses froze. Who am I, to stand before a king? To lead a nation? I am not enough. The fire did not fade. The voice did not change. I will be with you, not strength, not skill, presence. The man who ran from Egypt was now being sent back, not as a prince, not as a fugitive, but as something far greater, a chosen messenger, a reluctant leader, a man called by God. And as he turned toward Egypt, one thing became clear: the quiet life was over. Our story begins in a time of profound darkness, a time when hope was fading and silence had replaced joy. The land of Egypt, once a place of refuge, had become a prison. The Israelites, once welcomed, were now enslaved. For generations, they labored under the burning sun, their hands shaping bricks, their backs bent under impossible burdens, and their cries rose, but it seemed no one answered. 400 years, 4 centuries of suffering. Children were born into chains and grew old, never knowing freedom. They built monuments, not for themselves, but for kings who did not know their names. Every sunrise brought labor, every sunset, exhaustion, and still, Egypt demanded more. The system was merciless. The system was absolute. And at the top of it all stood a king, a man feared by nations and obeyed without question: Pharaoh. But even kings can be afraid. Pharaoh watched the Hebrews grow, stronger, more numerous, and fear entered his heart. What if they rise? What if they turn against us? Fear became paranoia. Paranoia became order, and that order became death. Every Hebrew boy, every newborn son, was to be taken and thrown into the Nile. No mercy, no exceptions, just silence. where life should have been. The river, once a source of life, became a grave, and across Egypt, mothers wept. But in the middle of this darkness, one woman made a choice, not of fear, but of defiance. Her name was Jochebed. She gave birth to a son, a child born into danger, marked for death before his first breath. But when she looked at him, she did not see fear, she saw purpose. For 3 months, she hid him, every sound, a risk, every cry, a threat. She learned the rhythm of silence, the language of survival, holding him close, listening, always listening, for footsteps, for voices, for danger, because one mistake would cost everything. But time does not stop, and the child grew. His cries became louder, harder to hide, impossible to silence. And the day came when love had to let go. Jochebed made a decision no mother should ever have to make. If she kept him, he would die. But if she released him, there was a chance. With careful hands, she wove a basket from reeds, coating it with pitch, sealing every gap, preparing it, not just as a container, but as an ark, a vessel of hope. And then, with tears she could not hold back, she placed her son inside. The Nile flowed, quiet, powerful, unchanging, and on its surface, a small basket carried something far greater than it appeared. A child, a future, a destiny. Jochebed released the basket into the unknown, not knowing where it would go, not knowing who would find him, only knowing that she had done everything she could. From a distance, his sister watched every movement of the water, every shift in direction, her heart racing with every second that passed, because now the river would decide. Not far away, another story was unfolding. The daughter of Pharaoh walked toward the river, surrounded by attendants, wrapped in royalty, unaware that destiny was waiting in the water. Then she saw it, a basket among the reeds. Curiosity turned to concern. She opened it, and inside, a crying child, a Hebrew child. She knew the decree, she knew the law. This child was supposed to die, but something changed. In that moment, not fear, not duty, compassion. She chose mercy over obedience, and with that single decision, history shifted. The child was taken, not to death, but to the palace. The very house that ordered his destruction would now become his home. He was given protection, provision, identity, and a name, Moses, drawn out of the water, a name that carried a story, even before he could understand it. Outside the palace, his people suffered. Inside the palace, he lived as royalty. 2 worlds, one identity, one destiny, still unfolding. A child, sentenced to death, saved by faith, carried by water, chosen by mercy. But this was only the beginning, because the boy who survived the river would one day stand before a king, and everything would change. History is shaped by empires, by armies, and by kings. But sometimes the course of humanity is altered by a single, unlikely soul. This is the story of a man chosen to change the world, a man who would stand against the most powerful empire on earth, to lead a broken nation from the chains of slavery into the light of freedom. He was a prince, a shepherd, and a prophet. This is the story of Moses. It begins not in a palace, but in the reeds of the Nile, where a mother made a desperate choice. Found by royalty and raised as a son of Egypt, the young Moses lived a life of luxury, shielded from the truth of his heritage. But the cries of his people could not be ignored forever. A moment of anger forced him to flee into the vast, silent wilderness. In the land of Midian, the prince became a shepherd. He found peace in the quiet valleys, tending to his flocks under the starlit sky. Then came the day that changed everything. At the foot of Mount Horeb, he encountered a bush that burned but was not consumed. From the heart of the fire, a divine voice spoke his name, calling him back to the land of his birth to confront the Pharaoh. Armed only with a staff and a promise, Moses returned to the grand halls of Egypt, demanding the release of the enslaved Israelites. When Pharaoh hardened his heart, wonders and plagues were unleashed. The mighty Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, turned to a river of blood. Locusts swarmed, darkness fell for 3 days, and finally, the spirit of justice swept through the land during the fateful night of Passover. With the dawn came the Exodus. Thousands upon thousands marched out of the city gates, their eyes fixed on the horizon of hope, but the Pharaoh's pride would not let them go. The thundering hooves of chariots soon echoed behind them, trapping them against the sea. Moses stood at the edge of the Red Sea and raised his staff. The winds howled, and the waters divided into towering walls. They walked on dry ground through the heart of the deep. It was a miracle that would be remembered for thousands of years. On the far shore, the people were reborn. They were no longer slaves, but a nation called to a higher purpose and a law. At Mount Sinai, amidst smoke and lightning, Moses ascended the peak to receive the 10 Commandments, the foundation of their new life. For 40 years, he led them through the wilderness, a humble deliverer who never lost sight of the promise of the future. He was a prince, a shepherd, a prophet, and a deliverer. His legacy is the story of faith overcoming the impossible. This is the story of Moses, a reminder that even the most unlikely soul, when chosen, can change the course of history forever.